And we're live. Welcome back, everybody. The PEO Speedwagon podcast episode 6. That's correct.
Was that a test?
That was kind of a test. I was kind of trying a new opening where, like, I started, you say 6. We'll see.
It went well.
It went well.
Right, let's build upon it.
Let's keep going. But episode 6. So this is actually going to be like our first part 2 to an episode, essentially.
Yeah.
We wanted to talk a little bit more about the topics we touched on in the last episode and some new ones and just build upon it a little bit. And so for those of you who maybe haven't heard last episode, we talked about fun with data. And some of the topics were around right pricing within a PEO and how to start working with a PEO and the negotiation process around what the price should be. And so we actually got a lot of questions about that, and people wanted us to dive in a little bit more. And so, Ryan, I wanted to hear, what kind of questions have you gotten, and what have been your thoughts since that first episode?
Yeah, it's really cool. We've gotten some good feedback, and we've gotten some reviews and things like that. That have been really very cool. Feedback has been wonderful, but this is the first time we've gotten engagement. I think it's because we hit on something pretty topical, given not only the time of the year, which is why we were talking about it last episode, but also it's something that PEO sales reps and consultants struggle with, which is kind of this window of renewal and when and where and how to gather it with your customer. And so I got questions from sales reps that I used to work with in the past at Insperity. I got engagement from partners that we're with now, just kind of my thoughts on kind of that, taking that a layer deeper. And that's really cool. I love that's what's coming out of this.
Yeah. Explain to me a little bit the window you're talking about.
Yeah. So we talked about it last time. It's that there is, before I step forward, it's just kind of going back. When I got in the industry, renewals, the healthcare information around the renewal and what the actual renewal rate increase was going to be was really important information to be able to establish a financial comparison, a side-by-side. What would it look like with this PEO versus what would it look like with your current healthcare plan or PEO that's renewing you at X rate? You always really wanted and needed to know that, but otherwise it wasn't really necessary for underwriting. Flash forward to today, and probably as far back as 6-7 years ago, it became a critical piece of information for the underwriting group. So much so that you couldn't actually develop a pricing model for the entire PEO relationship without having that renewal if you were inside of 90 days of your prospective customer's renewal date. So that kind of became reconfiguring how to do that. Not only did I have to gather that, but what would that trend do to my medical pricing within my PEO proposal?
Sure.
And then what kind of came out of it was the gamification that occurs with anything, right? Which is, okay, you underwriting tells me now I have to incorporate the renewal, so I'm going to try and get it earlier so I can do without it and sit in the catbird seat and try to evaluate which is the better option, leverage the renewal in the underwriting or don't. And then what happened next is underwriting figured that out, and so they pushed the line further out to be able to capture that and make it harder for sales reps within PEOs to do that gamification.
Okay.
So what's come of it now is that if you're meeting with a customer, say today, here in early March, and they've got a 6/1 renewal, like you have to get the renewal. You're inside 90 days of 6/1, and so your underwriting group is going to require that you gather this information so they can establish that right price, that sustainable price model for years to come. And two, to appropriately assess the risk, right, which they're responsible for doing. But you are sitting there, you're meeting with that business owner and their team, you're building value for your PEO, you're generating interest in how this is going to solve all sorts of human capital issues and problems, administrative problems, and ineffective work through manual processes. Maybe get them on a better healthcare strategy so they can attract, retain, their key employees.
Just consolidate,
get it all together. Yeah. Just get them really excited. And that business owner and leadership team is going like, this is really awesome. I want to do this. And then you find out, kind of like you do in that initial call, okay, we're a 6/1 renewal. Great. Here's the information I'm going to need to gather, yada, 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 census, everything else. And then also I'm going to need your renewal. And then they go, oh, sure, we'll get that to you. We're meeting with our healthcare broker here, in a couple weeks.
Sure.
And so now you're in this black hole. And this is the question that I kept getting this week, or just feedback and interest in having more dialogue around, is like what to do right now. Because law of interest over time says that when you leave that meeting, their interest is going to drop because they're going to return their focus to their business, their clients, their employees, and like all the excitement that ensued from your conversation about your PEO and what they could do for them is going to kind of slip into the background.
Yeah, they're running a small business. Something will come up.
They got other stuff to do.
Be urgent. Yeah.
Right, totally. And so the key is not just going, okay, great, let's wait till you get your renewal, and then we can price you, but rather start coordinating very specific behaviors and, more importantly, activities in your sales process that need to occur anyway, so that you can fill in the gap of that 2-week period of time.
Mm.
Because what I've seen more often than not is someone making the mistake of going, okay, great, Rick, I'll call you back in 2 weeks. Let me know how that meeting with the broker goes.
Yeah.
And let's say the renewal's not that bad. It's a 2 or 3 or a 6%. And what they had built up in their mind was going to happen is not actually that bad. And so the opportunity of status quo actually comes back into the picture, going like, we'll just do this. This is easy. Everything's, there's some challenges, but we can keep this. And this is kind of nice to have this predictability here. They're not thinking about what your PEO can do at that moment. They're thinking about that healthcare cost conversation. And they just got an answer that gives them the permission or the opportunity to just keep everything as is and not have any disruption to business.
Status quo is a hard thing to change. Yeah.
100%. So then the PEO rep calls back and says, hey, did you get your renewal? And like interest, because of law of interest over time, is very low. Plus the renewal was not that bad. And they're just kind of like, yeah, well, let's look about this next year.
Sure.
And you're wildly confused because 2 weeks ago, you were at an awesome conversation. There was tons of engagement, lots of problems to fix, things that your PEO could resolve. And that's very disconnected from where you were to what they just gave you feedback on pushing this out till end of the year.
Yeah, in the last 2 weeks, you've been telling your manager about this deal.
Right, you've been telling your manager, Rick. Yeah, you've told me a lot about it. So the key is keep their interest up. Use that window of time. And don't do it retroactively, like do it proactively. In that moment, when you know how the calendar works for this particular deal, 6/1, you're sitting here on 3/8, 3/11, and you go, okay, I've got this gap. They're not going to sit with their broker and get their renewal here for another 15 to 20 days. My PEO won't price it until I get it.
Mm-hmm.
Be active and go, that's perfect. Because we've actually got some important steps we've got to get done long before that. So one of them is going to be gathering all the other information. We might as well start the process of gathering that now. Let's spend some time today doing that. 2, I want to schedule a technology demo because a lot of the issues that are going to be resolved by my PEO are specific to technology. And it's really important, Rick, that you know how that works and what that looks like and who's going to use different systems. 3, we had a really cool conversation about realigning your benefit strategy, like doing some very different things to enhance the quality of your benefits without breaking the bank. Mm-hmm. So I want to have a benefit conversation where we really dig in and look at what you have and do kind of a side-by-side on just the different options that exist. So we'll do that maybe 2, 3, 4 days after the technology demo. And then a couple of days later, you'll have your renewal. And then I'll plan on coming by the day after, sitting down, we'll look at the renewal, I'll give you some feedback. The ability to do that and navigate that negative space of the absence of the renewal that's critical to your pricing model is so key to keeping that person's interest up. And it's really challenging. Like you've got to, like a chess player, like make those moves before they get to say, well, let's just talk in a couple of weeks. Like you have to take action and lay out this process for them and build upon the interest. And I think that that's something that there's just a great opportunity in the marketplace to understand that dynamic and accept that your underwriting group won't take your pricing, won't give you pricing until you get that. So I think having a plan made and then actually laying out that plan for your customer is really critical to keeping their interest.
Yeah. And then, when the status quo of their renewal comes up and they kind of say, I'm comfortable with 5 or 6% and everything staying the same, they're going to recognize the value that came out of the multiple touch points, the technology side, the health benefit strategy, and they can actually see that themselves and say, this is where I am. Well, I've met with Ryan and, this is where we could be. And they can see that for themselves rather than just say it's comfortable the way it is.
Yeah. My sincerest hope is that if you've done it right, they get that 5 or 6% increase, which doesn't kind of completely, it just isn't that bad. And they're willing to accept that increase. And then that person goes, yeah, that's not bad. But you know what? what Ryan said in that process, we still need to fix. Like that's not addressed by this 5 or 6%.
Yeah.
So the tech issues of administrative burden and manual processes going away, that's not addressed. Kind of a more robust benefit strategy and having different options and and then the administration side of it from the PEO's perspective, that's not addressed here. So I'm glad I'm getting this 5%, 6% increase because we historically had 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
This is good news, but I still want to explore my options. And the reason they're doing that is law of interest over time. Their interest is still up here. They're not saying that if it's down here.
You stayed relevant.
And we stayed relevant. And the solution stayed relevant as to how it can fix their issues.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, a lot of the feedback was kind of a little bit of a refresh on like how to do that because there are so many renewals coming up here on 6/1. There's a lot of renewals coming up in October, and there's even more coming up in January. And so every year, kind of like clockwork, this issue starts to elevate again.
Mm-hmm.
And people want solutions. Like the PEO reps want solutions. So this is a cool dialogue to be able to have with them because I love helping people that have decided to take on this industry as their career and help small businesses do that. And this, yourself included.
Okay. Yes.
And, and this is a good way to do it because if you do this right,
yeah,
that original concept that a PEO is a really powerful tool for a small to medium-sized business, like you keep that right in the eye line of that business owner.
Mm-hmm.
So when they lose interest, that's a loss not only for you, but that's also a loss for that business owner and those employees. So the fact that you can manage that interest up in a genuine way is great for everybody.
Yeah, it makes me think of a funny phrase you told me as a sales manager, which was aggressively waiting. And like essentially, if you have that initial phone call and there's a 2-week gap between when you get the renewal, you're sitting there and you're thinking about this great deal you have in the future, mm-hmm. and you're aggressively waiting for everything you need to turn it into a new deal. And so don't aggressively wait. Do take action, keep interest elevated over time and stay relevant is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. You're doing the best version of your process. And when you do the best version of your process, your customer wins, you win, and, in by way of a PEO relationship, like the employees at that company win.
Yeah.
And so that's really a powerful thing to be able to influence. And when you do those right, like those are the deals that feel the best, where you not only help someone, but you did it in a very methodical and like high powered consultant type order, like where you go, like, I was really critical. It wasn't just that they had needs and we could fix them. It was like, I really shepherded that deal through this important process.
Yeah.
And so this is really good information for people to be asking questions about because it is challenging. I also think like, a lot of the people that check this out, it sounds like, are obviously within the industry, but we also get a lot of business owners and HR people. We've gotten a lot of feedback there. And I like that they're getting this insight because they can have empathy for what that PEO rep is attempting to do.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just trying to make a sale when they're badgering you to get data. They're not just trying to make a sale when they're badgering you to take these next steps in the process. Like they are trying to walk you through what has been proven for that particular model is the most effective way for a small to medium-sized business owner or leadership team to assess a PEO. And so like understanding that's what they're trying to do, kind of getting a little bit of a, take a, an inside look here, I think is also great.
Yeah. And also they have more and more opportunities in their pipeline these days because the average number of employees at a PEO is going down essentially. Mm. And so, or the new customers is going down. So there's smaller and smaller organizations are joining up with PEOs, meaning that for these reps, they're having to deal with more and more companies in a given calendar year and run their process more and more times. So it's even more important nowadays that they have to have this structure, as you call it, in place so that they can run an effective process.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. When you brought that information to me, I've been kind of digging into it and trying to figure, just out why. I thought that was really interesting. I'm curious though, because you brought it, like, what have you been able to glean from that?
Yeah. Well, standing on the shoulders of giants here, NAPEO had a report that came out and for 2020.
I thought you were talking about me.
Yeah, of course. But their report essentially stated that smaller and smaller companies are also engaging with PEOs. One thing I kept hearing was that people would, when we're doing our prospecting or reaching out to folks, they'd say, oh, well, I have only 15 employees. Like I can't work with the PEO. And it was kind of like this stamp that everybody just considered to be true about the PEO industry. And they've actually started to go a little bit down market and work with smaller organizations the last few years. And so that's started to really catch on. And you've seen smaller organizations working with PEOs. But at the same time, there's also more of an increase in the white collar industries pairing up with PEOs too. So you're seeing the increase with people's wages inflating in the last few years and everything after COVID. So the higher wages, but potentially smaller companies are working with PEOs. And so you've got these reps that now are having to fill up their pipeline with more deals essentially to go through the year. But still at a steady pace of growth. It also reported that since 2008, the PEO industry has been growing at about 7.5% each year. So, I mean, I can't even think of an industry that's been growing that well for that long. And so really interesting report and stuff that comes out of NAPIO. But I thought those two dynamics of higher wages, smaller companies was an interesting thing for the PEO industry to be looking at.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting, but in a lot of ways, I feel like it makes sense because of what occurred, in 2020 to 2022, right? So I think in the smaller, you talk to small and medium-sized business all the time. When I was actively selling back at Insperity, and it'd be 5-7 employees, and they'd tell you the same thing. Like, I feel like we're too small, right? I feel like we're too small, and so I think that there's that, understanding that maybe I'm not too small. Like, the challenges that I'm facing are just as important from an HR perspective as some of these bigger, small to medium-sized businesses, 50, 75 employees. And that my risk is just as great, even though, like, it's a smaller, tight-knit group. I trust everybody, but the reality is growing government compliance and regulation is a big factor in that. It is becoming more and more worrisome for small and medium-sized businesses, small SMB.
Yeah.
And then also, I think the impact of the remote workforce. In the past, in like the 15 to 20, you would have one person who kind of had a responsibility of being a office administrator / HR, or if they were lucky enough, they had a legitimate HR person, like a classically trained HR individual. And now when people are 15, 20 employees, a lot of them are remote.
Yeah.
So the impact that a on-prem HR person has been somewhat diluted because they can't sit face to face like they used to be able to. I think that was something business owners and leadership teams really valued, as they rightfully should, is that my HR person can sit down with Rick and talk through issues, navigate those things, or just add to the culture that person is intended to influence. And now that it's all removed remote, culture shifted. It's still super important, but it's just different. And so now how you administer and nurture it is a little bit different. And so the concept that a PEO with a dedicated HR team and individuals sitting within the PEOs, whether it's a JustWorks or a G&A or a Venture or a TriNet or Insperity and so on and so forth, like, that person actually can now really feel like a member of my team because they're just as in my office as my employees are.
Yeah.
And so I think that has created avenues, big and small. So that has created avenues for bigger size, small to medium sized businesses, so that 50 to 75 to be able to access it. But there's also small, medium sized businesses that can access it. And so I think the influence there is that was creating more PEO prospects that are represented in that 7.5% growth. But obviously, law of numbers, the smaller ones are going to represent a bigger portion of that growth, right?
Yeah.
Just newer companies spinning up or just being at that smaller spectrum. And so more of them signing up, I think, has naturally kind of pulled that number down.
Yeah, I like to think of it like the average size compliance book for an organization, right? Like, if you have a book on the shelf and here's all the compliance that we need to follow. For an average organization, that book has gotten significantly larger in the last few years. Think of it on the shelf.
Yeah.
They've gone into multi-state, right? And they have remote workers now.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of things after the pandemic, the employment law book only gets larger. And I really think it's accelerated in weight in the last few years. And so for a PEO to be able to kind of offload some of that liability for them and responsibility, I think it's just why we're seeing smaller companies be able to do that. And I also think, you're seeing more like automation in job roles and condensing, especially as companies are getting more efficient this year. Hence, you're seeing some layoffs in tech and stuff. The revenue per employee is rising significantly. And so you're going to see smaller organizations over a greater footprint across the US who need these larger compliance tools to help them out. So
Yeah, certainly. You couldn't be more right about that. AI, automation, technology is changing the dynamic of what the workforce is and also what a small company can do with less people.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see these business owners and entrepreneurs and leadership teams making decisions to automate before they hire, which in the
Yeah.
past it often used to be the other way. And and then you still couple that with the barrier to hiring an out of state employee has gone down so much greater. Like
Yeah.
15 years ago, if you're going to hire somebody in Michigan and you lived in Kentucky, like you didn't even know where to start. Like
Yeah.
not only did you not consider that, but like there just was no candidate pool and there was no way to actually have that employee unless you had like a client up in Michigan that you needed to service.
Sure.
Now, today, with LinkedIn and other job boards, as well as the ability to do most of the work remote, like you can just kind of decide to open up and hire anybody anywhere. And I think people have done obviously a lot of that we know. That's not breaking news here, but that has certainly influenced what we're seeing.
Yeah, and if you're only looking at your local job pool, it can be difficult because now everyone that you were potentially targeting for roles, well, they're being targeted by all these remote opportunities that are coming to light. And so, you feel like, well, we've always targeted here. Well, that pool is shrinking, and
Yeah.
so it's putting pressure on companies that didn't typically go to remote to go remote.
Right.
And then, of course, then they need to find the HR and the compliance things to do that properly.
Yeah.
And we were talking earlier, if there is a part of an organization that can't be affected by automation as much as some of the others, my first mind goes to the one with the word human in it, which
Right.
is, HR.
Right.
And so I think it is going to be an industry that continues to grow at the speed it's been growing at, if not faster.
Mhm.
And I do see, automation and things impacting it, but really as people continue to expand and go more remote with their employees and their presence, PEOs are really going to be a pretty obvious solution for smaller companies as
Yeah.
well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that 7.5 is only going to grow because the marketplace
Yeah.
it warrants it because of all those different factors. So, so what that means is there's going to be at least be 7.5% more renewal opportunity conversations like we were having before
Exactly.
that you need to know how to navigate. And I think that the information you're bringing up about this is bringing into the conversation more relevant factors for PEO reps too. Is like, hey, you can pound your fist on the table for a 9-person group and go like, hey, you really need to do this because what you're talking about, that compliance book that's on the um, virtual shelf
Yeah.
is now getting greater and you need to manage it. And hey, when you hired that last employee in state of Washington, like you opted into a whole host of things you weren't entirely sure about.
Yeah.
Maybe you were, maybe you weren't, but if you were, or if you weren't, you need a solution for it.
Yeah.
And a PEO can do that like this, like just take that over, lift and shift the liability and responsibility. And that also keeps business and organic growth going when a business owner is focused on their business and not this other nonsense.
Yeah.
So
Great. Well, I hope that was answered the questions that we got in from our last episode.
but we'll find out, I guess.
Yeah, we'll just get more questions probably and more feedback, which is great. Please send more feedback. We love it. And it helps make this podcast better.
Yeah.
Episode 6, Fun with Data Part 2
In the books.
in the book.